somewhere. Joe, thank you for all that you do for us, and George, thank you for us. Also, Charis Books tonight. We're so thankful for ER and for his sponsorship and Charis Books. So, ER, thank you for being here and for the introduction. Welcome, everyone.
I'm going to choose a different mic. I just thought I had to adjust it because I was short, but it's actually not on. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you to the First Baptist Church. We were joking that it is a wonderful and rare thing to feel so welcomed by a Baptist church. And we do. It is a rare treat. And Charis feels welcomed, and the Georgia Center for the Book feels welcomed, and Mark and V.E. Schwab feel welcome. So, and I hope that you all feel welcome. So thanks for being here. Thanks for packing the house. It is a real honor to have you all here to be celebrating with us tonight. So Victoria V.E. Schwab, who uses she and they pronouns, is the #1 New York Times best-selling author of more than 20 books. Including the acclaimed Shades of Magic series, the Villains series, the City of Ghosts series, Gallant, and the international bestseller that we are here to celebrate tonight, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, which just climbed up the New York Times best-selling paperback list. So check that on your phones, check it on Sunday. It just cracked that list. We are so excited to be part of the sales that are helping crack that list. It's a big deal. It's a big deal because you are supporting independent bookstores. You are supporting a feminist bookstore, a queer and trans-owned bookstore. We really appreciate you for that. When not haunting Paris streets or trudging up English hillsides, V.E. Schwab lives in Edinburgh, Scotland, and is usually tucked in the corner of a coffee shop dreaming up monsters, which sounds very dreamy. We are very honored to have Mark Oshiro, who uses they, them pronouns, here with us tonight. Mark did us a huge favor by stepping in. You may have bought your ticket not knowing that you were going to get the glorious Mark Oshiro as your conversation partner. And while we would have also loved our previous conversation partner, we are really delighted to have Mark because Mark is truly one of our favorites and one of the best in the business. It is never a dull moment with Mark. If you don't know Mark, Mark is the award-winning author of the young adult books Anger is a Gift, Each of Us a Desert, Into the Night, as well as their middle grade books, The Insiders, You Only Live Once, David Bravo, and Star Wars Hunters, Battle for the Arena. They are also the co-author with Rick Riordan of The Sun and the Star, a Nico D'Angelo adventure. When not writing, they are trying to pet every dog in the world. So what's really special about tonight is that we're going to have 45 minutes of conversation and then 45 whole minutes of question and answer. So we have mics here and here. If anyone has mobility challenges and you would like to have someone bring the mic to you, just raise your hand and either Joe, who is in the pink, or I will bring a mic to you. But otherwise, we'd love for you to queue up on either side. We will probably have room for about 7 or 8 folks on each side, and then we'll cut it off so that we can be sure to have enough time for everyone's questions, because 45 minutes is actually going to go really quickly. So please just, keep your question as concise as possible. Make it a real question, not a statement. And without further ado, please welcome 2 of the best in the business, Mark Oshiro and V.E. Schwab.
Hello. It's so wonderful to see so many of you here. Before we get into our conversation, just a quick note on the note cards that you might have seen on your seat or around your seat. I know this is the first tour that I'm doing where I'm not signing afterwards for you personally, and the part that I miss most about that, I can't because there are so many of you, one of me, but the part that I miss most is hearing what you have to say. It's not really for me about the book signing part, it's really about the engagement. And so, if there's something that you would have wanted to say to me in the signing line but are unable to because of the absence of a signing line, these postcards are a way that you can say that to me. They'll be collected at the end, they'll be sent back to me after the tour in Scotland. Nobody else will ever read them but me. They will live with me, probably be chewed on by my kittens, but just know that it gives you more time to think about what you would have wanted to say. It gives me more time to receive what you would have said. So if you have nothing that you want to put on those postcards, that is absolutely fine. Thank you so much for coming here this afternoon, this evening. And if you do have something you want to say, you can write it there. Now that that is out of the way, hello, Mark.
Hi, friend.
Hi.
I love this reunion. We once did this 7 years ago
Yes.
at WonderCon in Los Angeles. So when I had the option to do this and it was presented to me, there was no question. I love you. I love your books. I love Decatur. I am now resident here. I live here in Atlanta. And so it is a special treat to be able to do an event here. So let me give you all a little bit of a heads up. If you haven't seen a Mark Oshiro event, that, ER spoke so wonderfully to me, but it was also a threat because I'm a little chaotic. So I have some questions for you that I slightly prepped you for emotional reasons.
For a couple. I only got prepped on a couple of them so that I wouldn't cry.
We're going to have a deep conversation about this lovely, incredible book that I love with all of my heart. And then I end the question with a lightning round, and each question is worse than the last one.
I am very nervous about.
Yes.
Also, do not feel like you need to one-up that somehow when it comes time for you to ask questions.
Yes, correct. Well, also, you'll hear the questions and be like, I would never ask a human that in my life, so it's fine.
I'm a little concerned, but it's all right.
You're fine.
We're
You're
here
fine.
for it.
You'll be great. You'll be great. This is great. This is wonderful.
This is great. I feel safe.
So I do want to start this off on a personal note. How many of you have read a book that just entered your life at exactly the right time? For me, this was this book. You had the lovely privilege of getting to meet one of my ex-partners years ago. And on the 10-month anniversary of his passing, this book came out. But I didn't read it on October 6th. I read it on the actual year anniversary of his death. I needed a book that you know that thing when you ask someone, like, I need a book to feel anything?
Yeah.
And someone was like, you need to read Addie LaRue. And this is a book that is very concerned with death, that is very concerned with remembering people and remembering yourself. And I read the whole book in about 7-8 hours, didn't move, read every page, cried a lot. Also did that thing where I read a Schwab book and I'm like, I'm going to get my revenge one day. For many reasons. But I wanted to thank you personally because this book helped me. It really helped me in that act of remembering someone who I loved dearly and truly, who I felt like was another part of me. And there's that element of this book where you talk about how as time passes, memory fades and the way the edges fade. Yeah. So I want to do a journey of memory with all of you with this book in particular.
Yeah.
And it is very special to me, so I wanted to have this special experience. So I want you to think of your memories of the early days when Addie LaRue was just an idea. What do you remember of that?
Well, I think, first of all, thank you, Mark. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you. All we can ask for as writers is that our work finds the reader at the right moment. Right? Oftentimes we find it at the wrong moment and we trust that the right readers will find it. But thank you. I think when we talk about ideas, we almost suggest it's an idea and it's a single entity, whereas I think of ideas more like ingredients in a meal, right? So, and the nice thing about the meal is that like by the time it's actually a meal, you can't always recognize all of the ingredients that went in. So I'll try and select the ingredients that you would recognize in the finished product. I was 23. It took almost 10 years to write this book, which is another subject. I was 23 and my grandmother had dementia for almost a decade. And what you have to understand about this is that I was not close with my grandmother. My grandmother was not well my entire life, but my mother is my best friend. And watching my mother be forgotten by her mother was one of the scariest and most upsetting things that I had ever witnessed, because the thought of that happening to me with my mother was so scary for me. So I had that's an ingredient. I had J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan, which is also a book about memory, and a deeply sad one. If you have not read the original Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie, I beg you to. It's beautiful, but it ends with Peter sitting on a rock, and he's forgetting everything that happened. So I was thinking a lot at the time about memory and the holding of memory and the idea that it's so much more painful to be the one who remembers than to be the one who forgets. Add on top of that I keep getting into churches. I love this church, it's beautiful, but I will talk about old gods, which are gods with lowercase g's. You know, monotheism is an establishment of a god as a singular with a capital G, and by its nature must be infallible. But the beauty of old gods is something I studied a lot in school, is that they're a pantheon. And because there's more than one of them, they more closely resemble the people that worship them, and they get to be flawed. So the idea of getting to write the devil, not as the devil, but as an old god, a petulant child god, somebody who's like your toxic ex-boyfriend in god form, right? I had this interest. And lastly, I'm really interested in Faustian bargains, but I have an issue with them, which is that I'm going to talk about Faustian bargains, but what I'm actually going to talk about is vampires, because vampires is a kind of Faustian bargain. Right. But it is almost always about straight white men, or I should say white men. I don't actually think that vampires can be straight, but that's a different subject. I think that vampires can be young enough to not know better, but I just don't actually believe in straight vampires. But Faustian bargains, they tend to be, I know. It's like you thought that you were going to be the only source of chaos in this talk.
No. You're right, and you should say it, though.
The thing about Faustian bargains, though, is they tend to be about men. These men live forever. They see everyone there is to see. They screw everyone there is to screw. They eat everything there is to eat, and they get bored. I don't buy the boredom, because in all of these Faustian tales, there is a way out. There's a way to stop, get off the ride, and they've chosen not to do it. And so I was really hung up on this idea of what it would take to stay immortal. And I was hung up on the idea of loneliness, because loneliness is the opposite of apathy. It's caring so deeply for something you don't have. So I was really interested in that and in the idea of putting this Faustian bargain into a femme-presenting body. Because the fact is, when you're a historical character and you become immortal, you are still in the body that you have. And if you're a masculine-presenting person, you move through the world with a different level of agency, especially 200-300 years ago, than you would have in a femme-presenting form. So those are kind of the core ingredients at 23. That go into Addie LaRue.
If I remember correctly, you had tried to write this book before. It is sort of taking a long journey to end up to the published form.
It took about 5 years to figure out the story. Okay. I'm not somebody that writes into the darkness. I'm not the Stephen King kind where he only needs to see by the headlights. I must know everything. I need to play tiny God. Just tiny God. I need to know. I know my endings so that I rewind to figure out the plot. I know my characters. I know all these pieces. So 5 years, I figure out the story. And I don't write it. 6 years, I don't write it. 7 years, I don't write it. I have little notes I'm jotting down, but I'm actively not writing this book. And I realize what's happening is I am so afraid of imperfection. Because a story lives in our mind and it is by definition perfect. It becomes imperfect by the act of making it.
Right.
As long as it stays in my head, I have not ruined it. I have not messed it up. As long as it is there and there alone, it's perfect. And I become paralyzed by the concept of having to make it real. And I couldn't do it. And then I remember this on tour. I actually had blocked it out. And I just thought, I just got over it. I did not. What happened was I read a book called Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. This is a craft book and a memoir, it's a narrative, but there is a chapter in Big Magic where she talks about an idea. She has an idea for a novel set in the 1930s in Panama. For months, she puts off writing the book, and then for years. She just figures, I'll get around to it when I get around to it. And then one day she wakes up and she doesn't feel like she can write that book anymore. The idea has fled the building. And the same week, half a country away, Ann Patchett gets an idea about a woman in the 1930s in Panama. And Elizabeth Gilbert postulates that the idea became impatient and chose another conduit. The anxiety.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I felt dragged, first of all. Like,
Yeah,
I felt
absolutely.
so attacked by the narrative. And then I started thinking, what would I do if after holding space for this story for almost 9 years at that point, I woke up and Addie went and chose somebody else?
Mm-hmm.
The horror. And it was the thing that finally kicked my ass into, like, we're gonna make the thing and it's gonna be imperfect, but I'm going to make this. I held space for this story. Nobody else gets it. But I was like, this story still haunts just the idea, Mark. The idea, like the audacity of that. But at the same time, the weirdest part is that becomes one of the last ingredients in Addie LaRue. The idea of the agency of ideas. The agency of inspiration was a thing I didn't really have until that moment.
I'm very stressed out because I have an idea I've been sitting on for 6 years. And it's
Get
I
to
finally
it.
decided it's going to be my next YA book.
Good.
But I'm like, ooh.
You know what you do? Every day you wake up and you say, I love you. Like, you just like look at the idea and you say, I'm not ignoring you. And like, maybe what you do is you take out like a notebook for that idea and you say, look, I'm writing you. Like, you just have to like placate. It's like a shy pet. It's like slightly feral.
Yeah, just treat it like a dog. Like
Exactly. Because
Okay.
I basically woke up and I was like, not today. Like, and I was like, oh, that's what's going to happen. It's like, it goes through neglect, not through your inability. I was neglecting the idea. Elizabeth Gilbert was I'm like, we don't neglect ideas in this house now. We acknowledge them and ask them to like sit for a minute. But sometimes I'll just make eye contact with all of my ideas just so that they know I still love them.
Okay. You. I'm so happy right now.
Right?
I'm so happy right now. So you and I are both similar, and we don't have an exact process, but we are similar in that we are not the write by headlights writers.
No.
I am a figure out the ending. In fact, I write the last line first in all my books.
I love it. I love to hear it.
Yeah, and so I'm very interested in the ins and out of the development of the idea. Particularly, I love that you were talking about time and place, because one of the things that was so fun reading it was never knowing where Addie was going to be, but then also getting this sense of how purposeful it felt. So how did you come up with the dates, with the times, the places, where she would circle back to? Because I love the circling.
I love
it's
a circle
so emotionally
moment.
heavy.
I love it. Oh,
I love
return
that
to
she's
your
like,
home every 50 years and watch it
that
die.
tree made me
I
bawl.
know.
Okay, anyway, okay.
Okay, it's fine.
We'll get to that later.
Estelle's
But
tree is like one of my
How did
favorites.
you end up figuring out where these anchors would be, and then also the things that weren't anchors, where she is dropped, I'll say?
Yeah. This story is so intentional. For better or for worse, every single thing about this story is intentional. So here's what you have to understand. I'm mapping this story. I'm mapping Addie's present day emotional journey over 1 year with Henry Strauss in New York City. On top of that, I'm mapping Addie's story with Luke over 300 years. On top of that, I'm mapping Addie's emotional journey over those 300 years, which breaks into 3 acts that we can summarize as like spite, loneliness, and hope. Or spite, hope, and like sedation, almost like this sense that we're just like in a space that we're holding. And then on top of that, I'm marking her relationship to Luke as it changes almost through 5 stages of grief. And so what's happening is every time we cut from the present to the past and back has to be a thematic intersection. Like, these are not happening simply in parallel. They're happening in like a helix. They're braiding together. On top of that, I have to design Addie's geographic journey. And it's not a travelogue. There's a reason that Addie's not like going to Tokyo and going to like Lagos. Like, she's very specific. It's a very Eurocentric story on purpose. Think about this. Addie is not trying to be Carmen Sandiego. Addie is trying to live. Like,
the theme song's in my head, immediately in my head.
Like, she's not. Like, she wants a life. I know, right? Now you're playing the theme song? Yeah, I know. It's cool. It's my childhood, too. She just wants a life. In fact, she doesn't even leave France until the French Revolution, and it is not her choice. Luke evicts her from the country. The first moment, by the way, that you're supposed to wonder, is that a cruelty or a mercy? Did he do that to mess with her because she would not have left her country otherwise, or did he do it because the French Revolution was kicking off and he was a moment of protection? I leave that to you. But the point is, I chart this geographic journey based on the fact that she is a woman traveling alone in a body that cannot die but can absolutely suffer at a time when nobody can remember her. So there is travel limitation. to how she can get around. There are geographic limitations to how she feels comfortable getting around. She is also, because of the nature of her curse, someone who is constantly seeking comfort and luxury. So I mapped her against some of the cultural and artistic enlightenments that were happening in Europe at the time. It's why she ends up in Vienna when she does. It's why she ends up here. And then on top of that, I had to map it across the few historical figures that I was using as waypoints for myself narratively.
I love that you referenced this earlier too, specifically about loneliness, but there is also such a clear emotional journey throughout this, about this nature of invisibility, which is so interesting. I didn't know if you remember this coincidence, but you and I are both in Vampires Never Get Old.
Yes, I know.
And I am obsessed with the idea of invisibility as someone who grew up queer, who's brown, who never saw themselves ever. And I've been struggling. So I have a story in there that's my first attempt to write about invisibility. And so reading this story about this girl who can never be remembered, I was struck by how intentional as well the way you thought of the curse and the way that it interacts. And I love the minutia of it. Like, you had to think, like, literally, if someone leaves the room,
I know,
does that count? So I would love to hear more about your process of developing the actual curse and the sort of rules around it, because they're not just rules to be there, they're rules for very emotional reasons, which I love. Like, I love world building that has emotional weight at the same time.
Exactly. I mean, it's erasure, right? There's a specific kind of erasure that's happening with Addie. Someone pointed out a few days ago that it was like queerness, and that, like, she has to come out over and over and over and over again. She has to reintroduce herself every single day in a way that I think you don't really think about until you come out of the closet and realize that it wasn't like one step. You were like, woo! And you're like,
it's
every
not like a software update,
exactly.
It's
not firmware, it's not software, it's just life. But I specifically, the curse needed to feel static but be changeable, because it gets really boring really fast if it's just a box. It's not a box, it's a cage. And the thing about cages is there are bars and there's space between those bars. Obviously, like, there were certain technicalities that worked in my favor, like the idea that she couldn't be photographed, because photography is a closer representation of reality. It's a lie still, but it's not an interpretation of somebody's, features in the same way that a painting or a drawing is. Addie can be interpreted because what it's meant to strip her of is autonomy. It's meant to strip her also of like the rights as a creator instead of a subject, if you think about it. Like, one of the reasons that Luke does this curse to her and gravely miscalculates the situation is that everyone that Luke usually does a deal with has a measure of ego. The thing about artists is, like, we want to be remembered. He's right. Like, the performer wants to be remembered. They want to create art so great that it outlives them. That, the artist and auteur, is an ego. I must be remembered. You will know my name, not just my work. But Addie, cares less about that than living a good life. And he completely misjudges. He thinks, like, oh, you will receive credit for nothing. And she's like, that's fine. I will still make art in a different way. The moment she figures out that tiny crack in the curse that is art, ideas are wilder than memories. This idea that even though she can't be the artist, she can be the inspiration, is an incredibly liberating thing for her. Like, it takes her really at kind of a vital place, because so the first arc of her life is spite. Spite will carry us a certain way, but spite does not sustain. At some point, spite dies, and what we're left with is hopelessness. And what Addie breeds into that space is optimism. And it's weird because Addie and Henry are coming at the reason to stay alive another day from very different places and with very different methods. But for Addie, it's truly optimism. It's truly like, Addie wants to live so badly. And she just, like, she would be so happy if she could, like, have carried on without this curse. But despite this curse, like, she is still finding things to live for every single day.
Those moments were so victorious too, when I would think she was going to give in because of many negative reasons. This curse is so awful, but she would just be like, but no, I haven't done this and I haven't seen this. And I just loved those. Is like, sometimes the smallest reason is the best reason to live.
I mean, this is the thing, like, if the pandemic teaches you nothing, is that sometimes you don't get to have big joy, but it doesn't stop you from finding the small joy. And, like, really, life is built up of so many more small joys than it is big joys.
Yes, absolutely. We're talking about Henry.
Oh, Henry. God, my Henry.
I have a lot of thoughts about Henry.
I know. I know.
And I don't know if this is the case for anyone else, but in my first read, I was actually very shocked as soon as it switched over to him.
Yeah.
Because I just didn't expect it, which I should have, because it's you.
Yeah.
It's you, and you will
I gotta
hurt us
pull
any way you can.
something.
And I was so struck by, again, this journey you took into his emotional space and getting us to understand who he is and then to reveal what is actually going on to him. So as this book came together in this initial stage 2, was Henry always a part of this narrative, or was there any time where you thought it would be mostly Addie or all Addie?
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, there were times when I was like, does Luke get a perspective? Is it Addie only? All of these different things. The thing you have to understand about Henry is, so Henry's my autobiographical character. The reason I get super like flustered talking about Henry is that I was working on this book, and it's a triad. It's 3 characters who are in conversation with each other. And I understood Addie, and I understood Luke. I knew exactly how to write them, because when you're a planner, you're like, I have stress tested you, I get it, I know how I'm gonna do this. Henry was a black box. I understood his relation to the plot. I understood what his function was in the narrative, but he wasn't a person. And then, because I started to panic, I did the thing I swore I would never do as a fiction writer. I like broke off a tiny piece of mirror and I just stuck it to the front of Henry. Now I can see a little bit of myself in him, just a little bit, and I think it's gonna be enough, and it's not. And over the next 4 or 5 months, I just start breaking off little reflective shards of myself and sticking them to Henry. Until I just one day, I'm like, oh, that's a whole ass mirror. Like, it's just, Henry is just a whole ass mirror looking back at me in a way that I did not enjoy. So what happened was, Henry Strauss is who I would have been if I had never found writing. Henry and I are exactly the same person until roughly age 19, a point at which our paths diverge. But all of my mental health, all of my storms, all of my way of seeing the world, all of my metaphors, all of my dark nights are Henry. And so it was not hard to walk down the path away from who I became into who I could have been, without the catharsis, without the purpose in my life. It was not hard. It was hard to write, but it was not hard to understand once I gave him that.
What did that vulnerability feel like while writing him?
Trash. Like, I hate it. I hate it.
Yeah.
I am really good at like ruining characters' lives.
Yeah.
It was not fun. Like, here's the thing you have to understand is, so like I plan my books in order completely. So I map them, I entangle them, I figure out how we're gonna do this. But for a book like Addie LaRue that is so character-driven and so emotional, it's written entirely out of order. The reason I do this is because it would not have gotten written otherwise. I essentially had to wake up, took roughly 9 months to draft, doing nothing else, just working on this book. And I would wake up and I would look at my wall of scenes and I would say, is today a hard day or an easy day? Is today a day for the French Revolution or a sex scene in New Orleans or the worst night of Henry's life? And the worst night of Henry's life happens 2 times, 2 ways. And each one took roughly a month and a half to write.
Yeah.
Like I had to be both in a very vulnerable place and in a very supported place. I had to know I was gonna see friends. I had to know that that this was something that other people could hold with me, because nobody really wants to go down a path when they're not already there. Like, it's asking yourself, oh, hey, you have these predilections towards self-loathing, you have these like hopeless moments, let's just follow that for a while. Like, let's just see what happens when everything in the day undermines the stability that you have worked so hard to build for yourself. So writing Henry was both the hardest and the most cathartic, but also I hate it because Henry is, to this day, out of 20-something novels, like truly the only one where my feelings get hurt when people don't like him, because he's just me.
Yeah. Because
Like,
it's hard.
It's
It is.
so hard. And you wouldn't know it because I keep it on the inside. I'm like, oh, that's fine. And on the inside, I'm like, it's fine. But it's really hard when you I don't write autobiography and memoir for a reason, which is that people ask me, will you ever write a memoir? And I'm like, absolutely not. Because I'm as transparent as I can be online, and it's still something that scares me every single day. I don't want to commit that much to paper. I don't need everyone understanding that it's just like chewing gum and vague dreams holding me together most days, you know? And good scotch.
Not chewing gum. Okay.
I know.
Not chewing gum. The thing is about Henry too is his ailment and what he's going through is sadly so relatable to so many of us.
Yeah.
And coming from this place where he just wants to be loved, and who doesn't want that in some form.
Yeah.
And at the same time, like, this is not the first time you've written about love.
No, no. I mean, yeah. I mean, no.
Vicious. Sorry.
I mean,
that's a love story.
I do. I don't write love stories. I don't write love
Right,
stories.
correct.
Yeah, and I have
But there's elements.
Sure,
of
sure,
that.
sure.
But for me, this felt like, oh, this is a much more prominent theme than in anything you've ever written. I could interpret love into other stories.
Yeah.
And so I was curious, how do you see love as sort of a major framework for these three characters? Because I would also.
Oh, I'm about to be so ornery. I was going to say, I don't see it as a love story.
Yeah.
I see it as a story of two relationships. One is entirely toxic and one is entirely desperate. Like it is violence and intimacy. Like I love Luke. Don't get me wrong, writing Luke, I love writing Luke. I love writing Luke and Addie. I love writing Luke and Henry. In my mind, there is an intoxication between Luke and Henry as well. It's not sexual for them. What it is Luke is the, what do they call it? The attraction of the void. It's like the feeling you have when you stand too close to the edge of something, and even if you don't have any suicidal ideation, you just think like, you like maybe just like a moment. It's called. There's a specific term for it. Luke is the conduit for Henry's own self-destruction. He's just someone who's holding that door open. So, but I don't think that this is a love story at all. That's contentious, and you are very free to disagree with me. You can love reading about these relationships, but I think if we look at what a romantic love story is. This is not a romantic love story. This is a story between Addie and Luke of entrapment and of toxicity and of compulsion and of like orbiting and of gravitational fields. I think they drift towards each other in personality. Luke becomes demonstrably more human. He's kind of playing house, and the more he plays house with Addie, the more into it he gets. Addie's becoming demonstrably less human through her centuries of isolation. Henry is a gift, and Addie is a gift to Henry. They are gifts in each other's life. They are coming into each other's lives at such an important moment, and they each function in really pivotal ways. But for me, you could take the sex out of that side of it, and it would be just as important, because it's really more just about intimacy. It's about being seen. That's really all it comes down to, is like, Henry wants to be seen so badly that he wishes for it. He accepts a brutal curse for the idea of being loved and but what he actually wants to be is seen, because he thinks these two are the same. Sure enough, everyone in his life looks at him and sees only what they want to see, and in there, he is erased. And then Addie, all she wants is to be remembered. So when she looks at Henry, she doesn't see anyone else. She just sees a version of Henry that remembers her. And it is intimacy in a void.
Yeah.
You know? And I think it's important, and I think it's beautiful. It is designed to be that way, but also it feels disingenuous to me because Addie is 320-something years old. Not in the like, ew, it's gross, age gap. It's not that. I mean maturity.
Let's discourse.
I know.
Let's go.
I mean, it's maturity.
Yeah,
He is a moment in her eternity, and she is a pivotal figure in his mortality. But I think love is simplifying it.
Yeah, I agree. I love that. I am also glad that we're now getting more into Luke, because I have the longest question about Luke.
Okay, go on.
This is all one question about Luke.
Oh my God, all right, let's do it.
I hate so much that there were genuine moments reading this the first time, and I reread this last week to just refresh myself, where I was just like, but would I take a deal with the dark god?
Of course.
Yes. Absolutely. I am a prime candidate. Vampirism.
Yep.
Give it to me.
Give me
I
Lestat.
want it. I want
Give
immortality.
me, yeah.
What's the cost? I'll pay it. I don't care.
Yeah.
So let's put that aside. That's my own personal issue. I want to talk a little more about a crafty thing, which is his voice.
I'm so excited that we're going to talk about this. Okay.
His voice is so distinct and yet eternal.
Yeah.
It is so original, and yet I almost could feel his cadence and know how he would talk, but then it starts changing. Because you talked about that he's almost like becoming domesticated over time. I want everything about Luke, but let's be a little specific here. How did you figure out how he would talk? How did you figure out how he would behave in those early things, and then how his behavior became so different by the end of the book?
Are you ready for us to get like so nerdy?
Okay. Yes.
Okay. There are a lot of parts of a story that never make it to the finished page, but are absolutely integral. I feel like I'm just anticipating.
That's coming there.
So here's the thing. There are many for Addie. There were the first lines. A girl is running for her life was not the first line of the book. The first line of the book was, this is how it starts. A girl is running for her life. And that this is how it starts was in every single part. This is how it starts. A boy is born with a broken heart. Because I wanted it to feel like an oral tale.
Yeah.
Ended up not needing it. So I pull it out, but it's there in the subtext. So this is where Luke's voice comes in. First 8 years that I'm planning Luke, he had this tick where every single time he came to visit Addie, he would start by reciting a line of poetry that was contemporary to the time that he was visiting her from. And the very first line he ever says to her is, "Come away with me and be my love." Now, I stripped it out, but I used that line to shape his entire speech. Like, it's a command, it's intimate, it has a very specific syllabolic rhythm, and I am very, very into very specific word choices. I have a poetry background, and I have to focus on cadence. Words have to land in a specific way. So the phrase, "Come away with me and be my love," became the scaffolding on which I modeled all of his early dialogue with Addie. So even though the poetry went away, he held that meter.
Yeah. I love that. Ooh.
I love also, so can you think of anything sexier? "Come away with me and be my love." Like, it's a perfect line. It's like the cellar door of poetry. Like, it's just a perfect semantic line.
So you write Addie LaRue in 9 months.
Yes.
What was the editing process from that?
Oh, no.
I'm mostly asking this because we have the same editor at Tor
I was
Books.
going to say. We have the same editor.
Who loves, my favorite thing, our wonderful editor, Mary Weinberg, loves to do the thing like, "Oh my God, I love this draft so much. Can you rewrite the whole thing?"
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Okay, so this is where we talk about first drafts and revision, because first drafts are, remember how I was like, I didn't want to write this book because I didn't want it to be imperfect? First drafts are, by definition, the farthest that your story will ever be from the version that lives in your head. Think about it. The idea lives in your head, and it's a glass sphere filled with light. It's perfect. The act of writing down the first draft is just the act of chucking that sphere away from yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
It shatters, the light goes out, everything's miserable. The act of revising is like gathering up the shards, pulling them back together, and trying to make the light turn back on.
Your metaphor is so much more violent than the one that I use when I teach about drafting, because I use that I have a puzzle in my head and I throw all the pieces down.
Yeah, no.
And the first draft is just finding the corners.
Absolutely not. I mean, that's beautiful, but it's not nearly violent enough.
No,
like,
it's not.
It's
I
not
like
accurate.
Yours is way more emotionally accurate.
It's definitely like mine is a much more like violent, like, well, screw you too. Like, I just like get very mad at like the ineptitude that I feel. But also, if you think about it, like, you have this thing and you're extracting it, and you haven't brought it back yet. So I write the first draft of Addie LaRue. It's grueling. That decision to actually write it, I was like, I made peace with that, and then I actually had to start. And I'm not gonna lie, those 9 months were bleak. There was, not only that, I was deeply convinced it was going to be the death of my career. And I, like, not saying that with like, oh, cheeky me, like, now that it's a great, like, bestseller. No. This is my 20th novel, and it was a massive departure. And it felt like absolute foolishness. So on my worst days when I'm trying to draft Addie LaRue, I'm like, why am I doing this to myself? Like, I have a fantasy series that's very successful. Why am I interrupting the momentum of a career that I have worked so hard for? So I'm undermining myself every single day. Finally drag the first draft out of my body. And I turn it in, and I'm so proud. I'm like, I did it. And Miriam Weinberg sits me down.
There's so much trauma on this stage
And
right
she
now.
says to me, no, this happened in Dublin, Ireland. We were at a conference together. It's burned into my skin, the memory of this moment. It was not good. And she basically said, I have been with you long enough that I know this story as it exists in your head. You have not gotten it onto paper. And I was like, I just want to melt, because at that point I feel like I've done everything I can, and even though I've written 20 first drafts before and I know that it's a first draft, there's always a part of your soul that's like, but what if it was actually good the first time? Like, what if it didn't hurt? Like, just what if it didn't hurt? And like, on the other side of that, I put myself through this. I specifically choose my editors because I know they will hold me accountable regardless of success, regardless of the number of books that we do. I don't want anyone on my team to become complacent. So I'm grateful for this. But in that moment, I did not want to hear this. No. I had to go retreat to my corner for about a month. I just couldn't we couldn't make eye contact. The book and I couldn't make eye contact. My editor and I couldn't make eye contact. I was not in a place to accept this feedback. So I go away. I nurse my wounds. I drink a lot of scotch. And I sit back down and I'm like, I am ready to hear you now. And my editor proceeds to lay out very lovingly that where the gap is. She's like, it's good, but you want it to be shattering. It's not phenomenal yet. It's very good, and in anyone else's hands, I would consider that great. But I know.
I'm so triggered right now.
I know what it can be. And she prayed on my own thing, which is that I know that you only get to tell a book once. Yeah. So it has to be everything that you can give to it. You can tell stories a million times.
What a thematic thing to say for this book.
I know. I was so mad. And then I had that point where I was like, why did I even try to write this book? It's death of my career. I don't even want to write it anyway. I was just again, kicking rocks at that point. I was so mad. And then we sat down and we started the long and laborious 6 months of taking the entire story apart and putting it back together. And I was about 75%, so much of the book is in revision. This is always the case for me. All of the art pieces at the beginning of every part in revision. The entire art installation at the High Line where Addie and Henry spend the day and he's able to write her name for her, revision. None of that existed. Whole pieces of Luke don't exist. The scaffolding is there, which is what my editor should have said. She just sometimes forgets to say that part out loud. And then afterwards she's like, I thought I told you that. And I'm like, you did not. No. You did not. You looked me in the eye. You were like, how's your day going? Your book sucks. And I was like, that's not the same. You know this. We're trauma bonded through this person in our lives.
Very briefly, She Murdered Me about 2 years ago, so my recent YA book just came out, Into the Light. Yeah. The first version of that book was a comedy. It is not funny anymore. And her feedback, which she told me very lovingly, was, far be it for me to define your brand and what kind of books you write, but I love how honest you are in your books. Mm. And as I was reading this, every time I thought you were about to get honest, you told a joke. Oof. So do you want to write a good book or an honest one?
Oh, yeah. She's lucky she's good. This is the thing about an editor, the best editors are the ones who make you mad like that, because you don't get mad if they're wrong. You get mad when some part of you knows that they're right, and you don't want to accept it. So the next 6 months, our revision, here's what I would like to say. I get 75% of the way through the revision, and the pandemic happens. And it's March 2020, and I know this because on my kitchen table in Edinburgh, where I live, were note cards. I was so stressed by the revision and by the fear that I have. My fear with revision is that in taking the story back apart, I will forget how to put it together. Yeah. I will change something vital and it will no longer fit. I will lose an essential piece of a character. And so I was writing down headlines for myself, things that I needed to hold on to, like lodestars, just remember this. And I wrote down for Addie, stubborn hope and defiant joy. If I can remember that, I can redo Addie in this revision. And I know that because I then leave Scotland and I fly down to my parents' house in France the day that the French borders close. I land an hour after they close. It is the scariest experience of my life because the entire airport, Charles de Gaulle, one of the busiest airports in the world, empty. 6 people, in the entire airport. I drive down to my parents' house with a carry-on suitcase, and I'm there for 16 months. I'm there through the entire rest of the revision. And that was actually a really big blessing because my family was able to like hold space for me at a time when like I was really psychologically struggling to hold space for myself, especially in a book this intense, in a book this, it asks a lot of the, I know it asks a lot of the reader, but it asked so much of me as a writer because I was used to veiling things a little bit more in playfulness, in the magic, in suspense, in plot devices. I could give myself a little distance in a way I couldn't. But I'll never forget, and this is the thing, because this was the 20th book of my career and I had built up and built up and built up, this was supposed to be my victory. So the book is finally revised, and it's good, and I'm proud. I'm so proud. It's the closest of all my books to that glass orb filled with light. I got it back. It was grueling, and it nearly broke me, and it nearly made me murder my editor, but we didn't. It's fine. I get it right, and I start getting invited to things that would never look at me because I was a fantasy author, because I wasn't general fiction, I wasn't literary fiction, but this was my way in. This was gonna be the whole new chapter of my career, and then for the next 4 months, I watch everything get canceled. Every day I wake up and an opportunity that I had worked for, and that's small sadness in big sadness, I know, but I'm being specific here. I lost everything I worked for. And I remember, I made peace with it because I remembered that like stories don't expire, and the way a story comes into the world doesn't define the way that it lives in that world, as evidenced by the fact that we're doing a paperback tour. But I have this vivid memory of release day. October 2020, I am supposed to be on a international tour, and instead I am standing in my parents' garden picking raspberries for lunch. And all I could think in that moment, I wasn't sad, I thought I'd be sad, I was really braced for a sad day, and all I could think in that moment was, Addie LaRue would love this. Like the emphasis of a moment of quiet beauty, of small joy, of standing in sunlight and eating sun-warm fruit and just like having a small, quiet life, because we're hustlers. And like this industry tells you to never stop working because you are on a hill. And the moment you stop, you will slide backwards. It tells us this over and over with every single book as we look around at the thousands of other books coming out every month, and you understand that you're a speck in that grand orbit, and it tells you never, ever, ever slow down, because someone else will pass you, and you will be forgotten, and it won't matter anymore, and people will move on. So to stand in that garden, because I had no choice, it was an act I would have never done for myself, to just be still. And yet that day, I was just still. And it was perfect. And I would have never had that. And it's something that I am so grateful to the writing of Addie, the character, for. Because writing her was a catharsis of learning to be more like her when I was so deeply Henry. And something I've carried forward now for the last 2.5 years is the knowledge that sometimes it's really important to stop and think, I saw an elephant in Paris. What will I see tomorrow? What could I be looking at now? Instead of my phone, instead of my fears, instead of my wheels turning uncontrollably because I feel like I'm never doing enough. What could I be doing in this moment that would be nicer to myself?
What have these last 2.5 years felt like since then?
I mean, weird.
Yeah.
Because remember, I was oh, this will be the death of me. This will be the death of my career. It's not, but at the same time, because I'm me and I don't know how to celebrate anything, I don't know how to again, I'm still not Addie. I'm trying to be Addie, but I'm Henry. Then the book comes out and it's a success. And I'm used to my books taking 3 to 5 years to find their readers. This is what all of my books have done. Vicious was never a bestseller. It just found the same number of readers every 6 months in perpetuity. And that's great. It's great. I will take that any day. So I was braced for Addie to have the same trajectory that all my other books did. And it didn't. It had a meteoric trajectory, thanks to everybody here and around the country. And I did not cope well with that because I'm me. My new thought process was, oh, you're doomed. Because You thought that writing this book is going to be the death of your career. It turns out the death of your career is going to be not having written more of these, because people would finish Addie, and it was for some people was their first introduction to my books, and they would be like, more please. And I would be like, I don't have any more. Because my whole career, I've done this thing for self-preservation as well as my own creativity to make stories that resist comparison. I don't tell the same story twice. I don't tell it in the same way twice. It's absolute career suicide at every turn. It's just the dumbest idea that I can't seem to let go of, which is that if you can't compare my books apples to apples, you will enjoy them more and I will be happier. What it also means is when somebody really loves one of my books and they come asking more like this, I'm like, I have no idea what to tell you. Yeah. It's just, there's no more like this. I'm so sorry. So then I have this deep, first of all, I'm grieving Addie in a real visceral way, for about 6 months, because she was a best friend in my life for 10 years. This was a passenger in the seat of my car. Everywhere I went, I could ask myself, what would Addie do? What would you think? What would you say? How would you move through this space? And then she was gone. I had no good reason to be asking her those questions anymore, so it would have been probably just psychosis to be asking her those questions if I wasn't writing about her. And so I was trying to let her go, and I was also deeply afraid that in the absence of another Addie LaRue-esque novel on the horizon, everything was going to crumble. I then spent 6 months deeply trying to just come up with ideas to no avail, because that's not how my brain works. That's not how inspiration works for me. I'm a slow gatherer of seeds, of ingredients, and I can't force the meal. I have to just wait until I have enough pieces that intrigue me, and then they come together somehow. So it was miserable. It was the best 6 months of my career, and I was inside every day because we were still having lockdown. I was still in France, and I was sitting inside every day thinking, I'm so screwed. I'm so deeply screwed. And I couldn't work on anything. And that makes me feel so ill. Because truly, I don't write, joy is too simple a word for what I write for. I write for sanity. My brain is this tangled space of string. And writing is the only thing that makes it feel like I'm pulling strings into straight lines. I need it. So to be unable to write because I couldn't get out of my own way, I was miserable. Until I figured out how to kind of shed it.
Yeah.
But I still don't, I feel like I'm still shedding tiny pieces of it. I'm still finding it like cat fur. I'm oh, look, a neuroses. It turns out I'm still afraid. I'm just shedding little pieces all the time. But at some point I realized you gotta move on.
Do you find that challenging with the film adaptation and having to revisit that world in some ways? Or is that a different part of your brain now?
I love it because it gave me an excuse to stay with her. Because without the film adaptation, I have to be moving on. And we're always in a weird place as authors. We're promoting books that have already come out. We're writing books that are about to come out. We're dreaming books that haven't been written yet. We're not very good at living now. It's really nice for distraction. But I missed Addie. And then to read the first version of the script, I was oh, there you are. I missed you. And I'm very, very lucky. It took a while to get the right writing, directing team, but when I read the first version of the script, it was a love letter. And then I read the second version of the script, and it was so much more because it did things I hadn't thought to do. It wasn't just choosing the moments from the book to accentuate. It was picking its own path, because the best movie is not the best translation of the book. Look at The Princess Bride and Howl's Moving Castle, two of my favorite books and movies. They are in conversation with each other, but they're not the same thing.
They're very different.
And they have to be allowed to breathe in this way. It's one of the reasons I let someone else write the film in very close concert. I'm very involved. But I wanted someone who had different eyes, who could see the story in ways I will always be too close to this book to deviate from it.
All right. Lightning round is here.
Oh, God, I'm so nervous.
And then it is all of your turn.
Mark, I'm so nervous.
No, they're mostly fine.
No, they're not. You told me before they wouldn't be.
They're mostly fine.
Oh, my God.
So if you have questions ready, you
Get ready.
Can
queue up.
Head towards the microphones. And remember, if you do have accessibility that you want,
raise your hand.
Yeah, please raise your hand. We'll come to you. All right, okay.
No.
What is the most vital aspect of your daily writing routine?
Exercise.
Yes, thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Yes, I told that to some kids yesterday. They were like, what's wrong with you?
No,
All right.
exercise is deeply important.
Which is worse, writer's block or the speed of publishing?
The speed of publishing.
Would you rather experience 1 minute of hearing everyone's thoughts around you at a random point in the day you can't control, or you could time travel 1 minute into the past once a day, but it would subtract a minute from your life?
Oh, the first one. I would much rather hear everyone's thoughts all the time because I'm already kind of imagining what everyone's thinking all the time.
Ooh, I love
It's
that. All
usually
right.
about me, and it's probably negative. Like,
What word? What word can't you spell right?
there are so many words I can't spell right. I don't know. Mercenary.
Oh, that's okay. I hate that. All right. What smell transports you back to your childhood immediately upon encountering it?
Cut grass.
Oh, that's good. Mine's popcorn. All right. I want you to think about your mortal enemy or nemesis.
Yes.
Picture them in your head.
Yes.
If you had to choose an animal sidekick for them, what would you give them?
A weasel.
All right.
Notice how fast that one was, right?
Which is more cursed?
Is this Gailey's?
This is a Sarah Gailey question,
Okay.
sorry. A cat centaur or a cat minotaur?
A cat minotaur. Wait. Which half is
That
cat?
wasn't the question.
Hold on. Which half is cat?
That wasn't
Why
the
am I
question.
picturing a cat but with the bull horns? But then also the bottom half is also bull? Like it's only the top half to here is cat? So it has like little cat paws?
I think you've given us your answer.
But then it's like hooves? Yeah, cat minotaur.
All right. Who of these two examples of people is more evil? Cis men who pee on public toilet seats and don't clean it up, or people who sit in your seat on an airplane and ask you to move when you show up and tell them that they're in your seat?
I sat on an airplane seat that wasn't mine today by accident, so I'm gonna say. I was like,
But that's
I was
accident.
so sorry. I was like, I don't even know why I thought B was on the far right today. I was so tired.
But that's different than the people who, like, aggressively
I'm sorry.
sit there.
The people who pee on surfaces and don't. I don't.
Thank
And
you.
I'm not even gonna say like just cisgender men. Like, I have been in some bathrooms where I'm like, come on. You know, I don't mind.
Is the
you
other
can
bathroom
miss.
dealing with
Misses
this? Oh, my
happen.
God.
But you gotta clean up after yourself. Remember, these are public spaces.
All right, for the sake of this chaotic moment, Luke makes a deal with you. What is it and what's the downside?
Immortality, and I'll pay whatever the price.
Oh, correct answer.
Yeah.
There's only 3 left. What's the silliest mistake an editor has caught in one of your manuscripts?
In Addie LaRue, the editor did not catch it, a reader did. I had so many little historical nitpicks, but there was one that I was deeply, deeply confident in, so confident the editors all ignored it, and I was wrong. And that was that originally the scene between Addie and Remy happens on the steps of the Sacre-Cœur, not Notre Dame. And the Sacre-Cœur would not be built for another 150 years. It was caught. None of your editions of the book have the Sacre-Cœur, but if you have an ARC or a very first printing in the hardcover, you should check. There's
Out of sympathy, I'm going to give you, which
Yes.
is thankfully a copy editor caught it.
Okay.
In the one of the last drafts of Anger as a Gift, I forgot the day Wednesday for the whole book.
You just
They
you
would
just
go to
skipped
sleep
Wednesday?
on Tuesday and wake up on a Thursday.
This is amazing. I mean, I would have left it in and been like, wow, some heavy sleepers.
All right. Last 2. Which is more tacky? Tagging authors in 1-star reviews,
Yes.
or when people tell you in person that they've never read one of your books?
No, tagging in 1-star reviews. Please don't do it, especially if you have a really pretty picture, because then I'm like, obviously it's a
yeah.
good review. It has such a pretty picture. And then I tag it, I like text it, I tap it, and I'm like, oh.
All right, last question. Last question. I cannot take risk. This is a Sarah Gailey question. What function does the liquid inside the Kool-Aid man serve, and what happens when it spills?
I mean, I definitely think that it's like life force juice. Like, I think it's not blood.
Yeah, it can't be
It's
blood.
not blood, but it's like, I mean, it's pink lemonade, but obviously he's a machine that only runs on pink lemonade, right?
So it's like life force, kind
it's
of?
it's like oil. It's like motor oil in a machine.
Okay.
Yeah,
I went straight to cooking oil, and I was like, what?
Or also just sugar. Like maybe he just runs on sugar. It's so sweet. Maybe he just runs on sugar. It's really, this is gonna bother me now, because this is not. I'm
It's
really
been
glad we
bothering me
have
for
other
hours.
questions, because I'm gonna like be deeply dissatisfied with the answer. The answer is I don't want to think about it too hard,
Okay,
because
well-
it splashes out. It doesn't feel like it should ever come out. Also, he's like running through things and it's not going.
And crashing through walls and.
What
Does
would
it
happen?
refill? Do you think it like replenishes?
Yeah, I think it's an auto-replenishing substance.
Do you know we are the first people to ever talk about this in this church?
Yes.
Like, there's no way anyone.
What do
ever
you
had
think
this
is inside Mr. Kool-Aid?
It's gross. It's really gross.
It's gross.
No, it's sweat.
No, it's not.
Yeah, because it's
No.
replenishing. He's running around all the time and it's filling up. It's like an auto-filling.
No, it's
I
not.
told you it was
no. Wait, I'm sorry. Why are you saying this with so much conviction? Is just your theory, or do you know this to be
no,
true?
I don't know it for sure.
Okay,
but
great.
This is my theory.
Yes.
Because it has to replenish because he's never empty. We've never seen an empty Kool-Aid man. Let's go to questions. This is horrible. All right.
Okay.
Over
wanna
here,
start
this
with me?
wonderful front bottom
Yes.
shirt. I love the front bottom.
Do you know who they are?
Yes.
I don't know anyone that knows
yeah,
who they are.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Two things, real quick. The phrase you were looking for earlier when you're describing Luke is called the call of the void.
Call of the void. Thank you.
I literally just taught my middle schoolers it the other day.
Okay.
My question is that I'm a teacher in Florida, and Addie LaRue was recently challenged at my school for witchcraft and sexual undertones. I was
Sexual
Undertones.
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 Undertones. They're just tones. Like they're not.
That was what I said.
I don't understand. Also,
Undertones.
wow. You know, I am not surprised, but I'm also going there tomorrow. So I just I like the idea. That I'm just gonna,
I know you are. It was sold out. I flew here to see you.
No way.
I
Well,
did,
Thank
yeah.
you for coming here, but also thank you for letting me know because it kind of feeds me.
Good.
Like, I mean, being challenged. I just want to put it on a book now. Challenged for, what did you say?
Sexual undertones and witchcraft.
Witchcraft and sexual undertones. And then it just says like Florida board. I would sell so many books this way. I might take that.
Well, so Darker Shade of Magic was also a challenge. And these all came off of my bookshelf in my classroom.
Great.
So I'm very proud of that.
I mean,
But-
I don't think I have any book that wouldn't be challenged for witchcraft, probably.
Yeah. So my question is, though I think you just gave us your answer, is how does that feel as an author to know that your books are being challenged in schools? Because, you know, Addie LaRue, I've read it. We've all read it. I deemed it appropriate for high school students.
Sure.
Darker Shade of Magic, I've deemed appropriate for high school students.
Yeah, as it
And
is.
suddenly I have parents coming to me saying that I'm indoctrinating their children. How does that make you feel as an author?
That feels less awesome than the knowledge
I get
of being
accused of
challenged. I mean,
indoctrination all
here's
the
the
time,
thing.
don't worry.
I think it's ridiculous. I think it's absurd. I think that, well, it's simplifying. I think that the most incredible thing about readers is like the reason they need to have access to books of all subject matters and stripes is that one of the greatest powers we learn as readers is when something is and is not for us. The ability that I find it writing middle grade horror novels as well, is like sometimes parents will come to me and be like, it's too scary for my child. I'm like, did your child say that? Because the incredible thing when you like let children read is that they're so good at making decisions about when something is not to their liking. And I don't think that you do anything in the service of their education or their curational skills when you decide for them, because guess what? Especially in this day and age, the internet is very big and it is very easy for them to go find whatever you just told them they couldn't have, and they're gonna be much quicker on the uptake to find
they're
that
very good at
if
finding
you've told them
things.
they can't have it. It is the nature of forbidding things. It does not slow it down. It does not stop it. It just makes you look like an ignorant asshole. So, thoughts and feelings?
What's that?
Do you have any feelings to add to this?
My YA middle grade books have been banned 500-600 times at this point. Like it's very common.
Sorry.
And my thing about it is we all know that these are being banned by people who don't read the books.
Yes.
Each of It's a Desert first got banned about 2 weeks after it came out, and it was banned for racism.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fantasy book. There's no race in it. Like there's no races. I later found out it was because there was no white people, so the person thought it was racist against white people because there aren't any. But I'm like, it's on another planet. Like, grow up. Does that make like Star Trek aliens racist because they're not white people?
No. Again, it only is a reflection
Yeah.
of the ignorance and assholery of the people who think they're doing a good job.
I read Stephen King's It when I was 8. I turned out fine. Like, well, I mean,
My kids are allowed to read the Stephen King books. They're in the library, but they're not allowed to read your books. So that's why I asked. I'm glad
It's
you brought up
incredible.
Stephen King.
Thanks, yeah, thank you though, and thanks for that knowledge that is going to piss me off for the rest of the night. But I'm going to figure out things to do with it, so we're okay.
We'll go to this side over here.
Hi, my
Hi.
name is Oliver, and I also don't believe that vampires are straight or can be straight.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Correct.
I've had this theory for years, so I'm glad
I
that
will
you support
die
it.
on this hill and this hill alone. I have had fights with people about it. You cannot convince me otherwise. Go on, sorry.
It's a great hill. No, thank
Yeah.
you. I'm a writer, and I feel like every writer has a love and hate relationship with writing, so I was wondering what's your least favorite part of the process, and how do you work through it?
You go first. Your least favorite part. You're like, I love it all.
My least favorite part of the process is when Miriam Weinberg says, "I love this book. Can you rewrite it?"
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially because every single time, all 3 times for 3 books she's edited, she was completely right. Like, that is my least favorite part. That weird
Yeah.
middle space between the shiny orb and then the exit, that's my least favorite part. Because it is disheartening sometimes where you're like, but it looks so great in my head. Why is it not coming out the right way? And that is
Yeah.
then why I do love the collaborative process of having an editor. I've had 4 editors across my career, and each of them do very different things, but it's that thing where they just can see what I'm trying to do. And I always liken it to all 4 of my editors, why I love them is they open doors.
Yeah.
They don't tell me how to get through it. They don't tell me what to do. It's just opening a door, and then I have to figure it out. And then that is how I actually get to where I'm going. But that middle gray area is just the worst.
It's brutal.
the worst.
I like brainstorming. People, when they find out I'm an intense planner and outliner, they're like, oh, but where's the joy? For me, the joy, there is no joy there in the drafting. It's just anxiety that I'm mitigating. And so that would be too loud for me to feel joy. So my joy is in the design. For me, the outlining process, I usually write a skeleton that's about 50 pages long. So it is truly a skeleton of the story. That is my favorite. I'm playing Choose Your Own Adventure in my head every day. Everything between that and the very last pass where I am choosing exact comma placements and exact word choices, hate it. I am not a writer who enjoys writing 90% of the time. I'm the writer who only feels relief at having written. And I know that's not always fun, and we're not supposed to say it. We're supposed to be like, writing is joy. And I'm like, it can be. But it can also be a really hard form of therapy with oneself that then the final product gets shared because it's safe then. Mm-hmm. The act of writing is so deeply personal, but it's only once I've done that I feel like it's no longer mine. I don't need it in the same way I needed it when I was writing.
Okay. Hi. I'm
Hi.
kind of awestruck right now, so I'm sorry if this is not proper English. So this is a personal book, it seems. So how do you think your past experiences and how you said poetry, how do you think that has impacted this book in a better way?
Ooh, past experiences impacting this book in a better way. Well, like poetry, I think that I like shaping the structural aspect of a narrative to voice. And so, for instance, Addie LaRue is essentially an oral tale. It's a story being told from one person to another and then being recounted back to us. And so semantically and syllabolically, that was really fun. I also think, though, it's deeply important that I didn't write this book when I was 25, which is when I was originally going to write it, because I didn't know I was gay. And not I was in the closet and I was scared to come out of it. At that point, I did not know. I was so opaque in the dumbest way possible that I kept falling in love with girls and I kept kissing boys and I really liked the girls and I did not like the kissing of the boys, but I was must be me. I wasn't must be trying. And this book is to me so much about casual queerness in literature and in storytelling, and the idea that because I came out in my late 20s, I personally don't need a coming out story. I love that they exist, but what I need are queer existence stories. I need stories where queer characters get to take up space in ways that have nothing to do with their identity, right? Because when we only include a person for one aspect of their identity in the narrative, and that's augmented in that narrative, what we're saying to the real people who are reading those stories is that you are only worth having a story if it is mining your pain, your trauma, your love, this one piece of you. And it's so reductive and it's so toxic. And I wanted to write a story where the fact that my characters were queer, all of them, was canonical and yet completely incidental to the plot that's being told here, because the normalizing of that is itself a powerful thing. And also with Henry, I wanted to give him a queer community. Like, we get tokenized in a way where sometimes there's only one of us in a book, and I'm like, we don't move alone? Like, we don't move alone.
We're wolves, like.
Yeah, we move in packs for a reason. So, like, I needed Henry to have a pack. And, like, I wanted to explore some nuances within the queer community that I knew I could only do if I had enough of us in a story. And I also knew that because of the point I was at in my career, it was probably going to be a fairly mainstream, well-read book. Not this well-read, but well-read. And that to me felt like, yes, like I'm going to sneak in. And the people who aren't going to need to see this probably won't notice it, but the people who are going to need to see this are like, oh my God, do I just get to be a person in this world and it has nothing to do with the fact that I'm queer? So I just really wanted that. It was very important. But if I had written this book at 25, while so much of the plot would have been identical, I would have missed that. And I would have been so sad in retrospect to have not been able to put that there.
Hi. So Addie's freckles.
Yes.
How and when were they born? And what's the significance of the number?
7 freckles. 7 is my lucky number. My birthday is July 7th.
Oh,
Sevens
delightful.
follow me through the world in very weird ways. The true answer of Addie's freckles is the same thing as Kel's coat, which is to say that I am almost face blind. It's not all the way, if I have met you enough times, I can hold on to it, but usually by picking one detail of your face. I have a very hard time with faces in my life. And so when I write characters, when I design characters, I don't see their faces. That's why I lean into fashion so much. I give them a shortcut. The freckles were one of the only ways I thought of that I could give Addie a visual shortcut that had something to do with her face, which was so important to me. Also, that could be reduced then in art in abstract ways. I needed to give her some kind of marker, some visual thing that could be played with by the artist. But I got really excited by the idea that I could actually do something facial for her that I would be able to use to hold her in my mind. But even when I picture Addie, I don't see her face. I see almost like a chiaroscuro, like the light. I see like the edges and I see the freckles as if they're stars. I don't see faces. I never see faces. That's why I'm always amazed by fan art when it captures a character and when it seems consistent, because I'm like, I didn't know what they look like, but I'm like glad that you did. But it's the reason I use a lot of fashion things, because I'm thinking it's like a quick way into a character's assassination without having to lean on something that I can't see. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, so I recommend Vicious to anyone who ever asks, and some people who don't.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you where the characters of Eli and Victor come from and what they're made up with, because they're written so I can feel them, and that's kind of incredible and really what I love about the book so much.
Thank you. We're going to bring it back to Miriam for a second, because Miriam's so mad about this story that I'm about to tell you. I wrote Vicious when I was about to quit publishing at 25. Everything was going badly. Just truly. My first novel, The Near Witch, came out. My publisher took it out of print after 18 months. My second and third books came out that were supposed to be a trilogy. My publisher canceled the trilogy. They blamed me. They said I didn't try hard enough to sell books. They said it couldn't be their fault. I was in a terrible place, and I was mad. And I thought, up until that point, there was definitely part of me in my early 20s that was trying to write what I thought people wanted to read. And I had a moment of screw all of you. You weren't here, so it's not you guys. It's not you all. The invisible you, screw publishing. If no one's gonna read me, if I'm going out, if publishing is over for me, I'm gonna end by writing the story that I want to read. I'm gonna write as weird and as dark and as messy as possible. And Victor and Eli were the result of that. Now, because I thought this book will never get published, because I am exiting, pursued by bear, I thought, it doesn't really matter what I call them, so I will call them Victor and Eli. Fast forward. Miriam, our editor, buys the book. And you should know, even when Tor bought Vicious, surprised me, they were like, we don't think this book is gonna sell. Just so we're all on the same page here.
Yeah.
But we're super curious about what you do next, so we're kind of seeing it like a super cheap investment in you to like just placate you. And Miriam, and we decided we're gonna do a version of my name. I'd been Victoria up to that point. We decided we're gonna do a version of my name on the cover. So we go with my initials, VE. And one day, far down the editing process, far too late to make any changes, my editor goes, hey, I never asked you, what's the E stand for? And I was like, oh, it stands for Elizabeth. And she was like she just like stares out into space for a moment. She goes, so let me get this straight. She was like, your name is Victoria Elizabeth? And I was like, yeah. And she was like, and you named your main characters Victor and Eli? And I was like, yeah. And she was like, I mean, we can't change it now, but like, why would you do that? And I was like, well, they were the two sides of my identity. And I was like, this was all just a meta exercise. I wanted to see when I wrote it if I could make you care about bad people. Because I had this thesis I wanted to explore. All my books have a thesis. And my thesis was, we don't actually care what a person does. That's not how we root for them. We care about why they do it. Could I take two really terrible people who are doing really bad things for completely different reasons and make you love one and hate the other? And that was Victor and Eli. Victor, before Henry, is the only other autobiographical character I have. The fact that they're both men tells you something that, like, I'm still working on. But, like, life is a journey.
Absolutely.
Life is a journey. But I made Eli, like, my opposite. And I made Victor my just, like, he's everything about me. So, I mean, serial killing aside, but like, but yeah, Victor and Eli came from me, and their names come from me, and it, like, my editor has never let go of this fact. She like checks with me now. Anytime I name a character, she's like, you know anyone by that name? Is like someone gonna ask me why that name is being used? So yeah, that's where Victor and Eli came from.
Thank you for that, and thank you so much for writing it and continuing.
Thank you.
Love that.
Okay, I feel a little weird because they all gave very like deep questions. I'm about to ask about the cat.
Yes.
But
thank you.
Book was my favorite character. I am aware it's a cat.
Yeah.
Why, you said everything was intentional. So what was your inspiration, or like what gave the idea for Book?
For Book, the cat?
Yes.
Because I thought like so the last word bookstore is an amalgam of every bookstore I've ever loved, right? It's a perfect sanctuary. And I just thought you can't have a bookstore without a cat, but I'm like really into naming things, and I was like, what's the perfect name for a cat that lives in a bookstore? It's obviously Book. And so like, to the point where like, as it stands right now, like Book will be in the movie regardless of what else changes about the plot, because I'm like, you better have a cat named Book. I think in the current version of the script, like he's just Henry's pet. It's not a bookstore cat, but I still think that Book is such a perfect name for a cat that, yeah, to me, I just was like, I get really mad if I walk into a bookstore and there is no mascot pet.
Yeah.
Like, I am coming here for sanctuary and for comfort, and you're not giving me both of the things that I want. I want a book and I want a pet. And I need them to be both there together. So Book is my two pieces of sanctuary in the shape of one cat.
Thank you. I completely agree. More cat books.
Thank you.
Please.
Also, wait, just to your point, there is a question that I have been asked that I cannot answer, but I think it's interesting for us all to think about it and carry it with us. Do animals remember Addie? Because Book engages with Addie in a slightly different way than the humans in the book do. So.
I noticed that.
Dun, dun, dun. Hi.
Hi. So I have a question, I wrote it down, about fantasy and truth, I guess.
Sure.
So when I tell people I want to write fantasy books, a lot of them sound like disappointed. Like, why don't you want to write about real life, you know, kind of stuff like that. And I disagree with that, because while researching a college final paper several years ago, I found a quote by Ursula K. Le Guin, who she said fantasy is true. And how do you make your fantasy as true as you do? Because it rings true for me, and I was wondering how you do that.
I love this. First of all, I so deeply disagree with the premise that realism is truer than fantasy. But my favorite fantasy, so the thing you have to understand about me is that, I think I've said that. That's my new phrase. I don't like that. I'm gonna work on that. I'm gonna try to say that less. But we're workshopping. I didn't think you don't know that, but I'm always workshopping. I want to sow doubt in your reality. Reality to me is so much less interesting than possibility. And I grew up wanting the world to be stranger than it was. I still want it to be stranger than it is. And writing fantasy that sits so closely against reality, what that does is it tells you that the world is magic, but you haven't found the right door. It doesn't tell you that, oh, well, you can only access magic through the pages of a book. It tells you to look around your own world and look for cracks. And I think that that's such a more interesting way to move through the world, looking for echoes of more. And I think we all should. My friend Jenna calls it the art of noticing, which is that the world becomes progressively more magical the more you pay attention. And I think sometimes with realism, we just don't pay enough attention if we assume that we already understand everything.
Yeah. All that. I think it's frustrating as someone who's also written fantasy and contemporary fantasy. Like, well, first of all, there's contemporary fantasy, which is fantasy set in the real world. So is that not realistic either? Like, sorry, I'm not directing that at you. Not with you. But the thing that, some of the fantasy that I love in particular, and even just speculative fiction in general, like I think about how realistic the work of Octavia Butler is. And how she literally predicted our future, and it's terrifying.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make it any less realistic just because you were using a means to tell a story. If that's the case, then literally writing a book is not realistic because nothing happens like a book. So I just think it's garbage, just garbage.
It's all fiction. It's like when you find out that we think of photography as reality, but photography is a lie because someone has chosen what to include in the image and what to exclude beyond that frame. Everything we do is curation of reality.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
What would you say to someone who would like to write a book, but who is having trouble getting inspired or sitting down and actually writing it?
You go first.
Not my event. Okay, no. So getting inspired, I would start with, because there's two different types. There's inspired to literally write it, but then there's also inspired as in what is the thing that I'm going to write about. I was at a school visit yesterday in Kenosha, Wisconsin, visiting a high school, and one of the things I told them, because I had someone who asked a very similar question, I'm going to tell all of you too, if you are creative in here, every person in this room has a piece of art that only they can create. You are the only human who can create that one piece of art. And the lucky thing about us is we get to do it over and over again. There is a piece of art that only we can do. And so when I'm talking about inspiration, I ask people, what are the things that you enjoy in other people's art, but then what are the things that you wish there were more of? What do you wish that you could create? What is something you haven't seen? You know, in some of the books that I have written, it's from a magical closet. I wanted a magical closet to protect me from my bullies, so I wrote The Insiders. I wanted the ability to time travel so I could go back and redo things that I did poorly. That is, You Only Live Once, David Bravo. I'm thinking of those sort of ideas. We have a mutual friend who we adore, Danielle Clayton, and she always talks about how writing is answering a question. And I love approaching it, and like you're talking about, like your books are a thesis.
Yes.
I love that, of thinking of an idea instead of thinking of the specifically, I'm gonna write this book with these 5 things in it. I tend to think of the bigger ideas. What do I actually want to talk about? What is something maybe I went through that I want to write a story about? As for actually writing it, I just try to trick my little monkey brain every single day. My big thing right now is I will put a little bowl of peanut butter filled pretzels next to me, and every time I write 100 words, I can eat one of them.
Oh my God. You have so much more willpower than I do. I'd be like, pre-word, pre-word, pre-word.
Well, it's bold of you to assume I don't eat the whole bowl in one go. Like I write 100 words, I'm like, I meant one bowl. Okay, But sometimes it is just the act of sitting down and giving yourself a habit. Here in Atlanta, I have this weird room in my apartment that has no windows, and they were like, have fun with it. And I turned it into a library. And so now I have a space where my musical instruments and my books are, and I sit in there and I feel inspired, and it makes me feel more likely to create every single day. And I would also just say, be kind to yourself.
Yeah.
It is okay if you write one word. Like if you go tomorrow and you're like, I'm going to work on a story, and you write one word, that is one word you didn't have the day before. There are some days I don't write any words because it just isn't the right day, and I try, I don't know the most successful, I try to be kind to myself as I'm creating.
I feel like you've covered it. The only thing I would say is like, I struggle a lot with the scale of story. It's really easy to get overwhelmed by the idea of, I want to write a book. Like, the first time I ever wrote a book, it was because I was terrified of failing to write a book. So I forced myself to do it so that I saw that I could do it. But I'm now on book like 23. I don't sit down and think I'm going to write a book. I trick my brain into thinking I'm writing a collection of escalating episodes. I'm writing moments. Never sit down and think I'm writing a book. It's the reason I write my endings first. People think it's like a cute quirk. It's not. I write my endings first because when you don't have an ending that you're excited about, it's like standing at the edge of the desert, staring at a questionable amount of sand. You're like, I don't know how far it goes. And that's so daunting, of course you can't go through it. But when you figure out an ending that excites you, you are standing at the edge of a football field. It is still a distance that you will have to cross one step at a time, but it is a manageable and finite amount of distance. So like break it down into smaller and smaller bites.
I would also say, because I also do the same thing where I write the ending first, for me, how that helps me is in the moments I do get stuck and when it gets hard and I feel like I'm lost in the weeds of the story, I'm always thinking, well, how do I earn that ending?
Yeah.
Because I love a book when you get to that last line, that last scene, and you feel fulfilled, you feel angry, you feel like you are feeling something immense about this story you experienced. And so I like having that ending first so that when I am getting stuck, when it is very difficult, I'm thinking of, well, I need to get there. Yeah. What's a fun thing that I can do to get there, or a fun way to block my character from get there? And it helps me motivate in those harder moments.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
My heart is pounding. My question is, I just recently binged your No Right Way podcast Instagram series, and I love your stovetop metaphor.
Yes.
Of just having one on high, the rest on simmer. I want to know when you decide to throw a pot away. Of it's not going to work, it's bubbling up, I have to turn to it, I have to throw it away. Do you look back? Do you try to salvage it again? I want to know, and also, if you need bar recommendations in Decatur with nice scotch, my friend has those.
Okay, all right. This is the problem with only being in a place for like less than 24 hours, is that my wake-up call tomorrow is at 4:30 in the morning, which really inhibits my ability to drink all the scotch that I would like to tonight. Here's the thing you have to understand. So my stove metaphor is that basically my brain is a 6-burner stove. I have one project that I'm actively writing on high heat, and everything else is on low heat. If it gets to the stove, it doesn't ever get thrown away. I have no trunked novels, and that's because all the plot work I do to like make sure that my ingredients are enough to make a meal happens before it goes on the stove. The stove is a holding pattern for stories that I'm going to choose between. What does happen sometimes is that something needs more time. Often a story will sit on the stove and I will think that's going to be the next book I write, and instead it's not bubbling yet. It's not ready, but another book is. And so I have to choose because I'm not a very fast writer. I'm just a relentless one. Yes. Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
I've been reading your books for a long time, and I remember picking up The Archived and The Unbound, and I just wished there was a third book.
Me too.
So I remember like they were so good. I reread them sometimes. But I was wondering, this is kind of a happier question than on the topic, but if you could pick a few of your characters from different books to go on like a road trip together, which ones would you pick? Like, how would it go?
I'm a monster. So I'm like, okay, let's see. Victor Vale, Lila Bard, Kate Harker. I mean, like, no matter, all roads lead to murder. We understand that, right? Like,
100%.
All roads lead to these, like, it's gonna be the start of a horror film, not like a frolicking road trip. But this is the reason that like my favorite scenes in the Shades of Magic series are when I put characters who hate each other on a boat. Because like every time I get to put Kel and Alucard in the same room, they snipe at each other. Like there's a scene in Threads of Power where they've been apart for a really long time, and literally like Alucard opens the door, sees Kel there, and then just like was like, I didn't order this, and like closes the door and walks in. Like hate each other so damn much. And so my favorite thing is just like take people that just like cannot be in a room together and be like, here's a confined space. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
You talk a lot about the questions you were asking Addie over the course of the 10 years you took to write the book. When you kind of personified her and put her, in your front seat next to you, or when you were walking in gardens and thinking about her, what questions was she asking you in the process?
Oh, whoa. We are hitting hard tonight.
So glad I don't have to answer that one.
Oh my God. I mean, it's almost like she doesn't ask me questions, she just suggests that I slow down and notice the things that she notices. It's definitely more of like a casual interrogation, not in the mean way, just in the like, I'm asking, I'm the interrogator here. Because what I was looking for specifically was I was continuously asking Addie, if I only had one paragraph to describe this place for you, what would you notice? So it was more reflected back at me as a reminder that I should notice. Because in order to ask her that question and take it in through this lens, through these eyes, I had to slow down and put myself in her position. So yeah, it was always about noticing, and especially about noticing in brevity. It's very easy to describe a city when you have 25 pages. It is very hard to describe a place in a way that feels faithful when you have 2 sentences.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's a great question.
My favorite thing about going through Addie the first time I read it was just seeing like the characters' reactions to what they could and couldn't control. And the entire time I was reading, I kept thinking about what other gods or spiritual creatures besides Luke. I kept kind of waiting and wondering if like there would be another one, but of course it's from Addie and Henry's perspective. But were there any like earlier drafts where you included more of that like side of reality or,
Yeah. I smile because there's absolutely and never will be a sequel to Addie LaRue, but the only caveat to that will ever, I'm not promising anything, I'm still, the pot is not on the stove yet, is I'm really interested in the rest of Luke's pantheon because he is part of a series. And the only thing that there was a version where there was another character in it, they weren't in it, but they were referenced, which is in the very first version of Luke and Addie in the church, when he's talking about souls. And he's talking about competing for souls. He's talking about a sibling in the pantheon and not the church, not God. And so I do imagine a counterpoint to Luke specifically. Like if there's a god of darkness, then there is obviously a god of light. But given that they're my pantheon, it's probably not a very good person. And none of my gods are like holy. All of my gods are just assholes.
Because I kind of came to the assumption that since no other gods were answering her, I was like, is Luke just like holding them back or like,
Ooh.
I don't know, so many different things happened in my mind because I just had to answer that question.
I love this. I always imagine that they want different things. All the gods in Luke's pantheon are doing different things. I imagine a god of chance and fortune. I imagine a god of light. Like they all just want different things.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I know we're running out of time. We're going to be brisk. All right, go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
So you've talked about fear some tonight, and I was just wondering, in our world of writing and publishing, if you don't have a Luke, how do you conquer fear?
How do you conquer fear in publishing without a Luke? Okay, here's the thing.
I yell at Daniel Clayton and
You find your friends. They will hold you accountable. Community, but also, I'm going to be really blunt with you. Like, if you write, you're a writer. You need to take yourself seriously. If you write, you are a writer. You do not need to be published to be a writer. If you want to be an author, which is my distinction there is that someone's paying you. It is an occupation. Your hunger must always outpower your fear by this much. There is no world in which we don't feel that fear. That fear is there every single day. But if your want is not louder, it won't work. So you just have to want it more than you're afraid of it. And sometimes you'll want it more than you're afraid of it by a mile. And sometimes you'll want it more than you're afraid of it by an inch. But just never forget why you want this thing, because you will have to want it more than anyone else wants it for you.
That.
Thanks. You're welcome. Hi.
Hi. So I think I speak for a lot of us here when I say that this book sets the bar for us readers. This book changed my life. Got me back
No
into
pressure,
reading.
self.
Yes,
It's fine.
no pressure. Like all the praise, because this book is perfect, in my opinion, and is the book that anytime I read a book now, it's compared to this one. Like it's, in my opinion. There you go. My question is there a book or literature, poetry, whatever, that is that to you, but that this book is to me and probably, so many other people?
I know my answer. We Are Okay by Nina LaCour.
Okay.
It is a young adult book. It's very short. I think every word is exactly in its right place in that book. And she has a power of economy of language. Because I'm an overwriter. I write long. All my books are long. I think they're always going to be. But she can capture things in so few words, and her books feel like poetry. But that book in particular is about grief, and it's about two teenage girls and a specific night in a dorm room. And I've read it probably 50, 60 times. And it's, for me, I judge all books based on that book.
Okay, cool.
We Are Okay.
By Nina LaCour.
Nina LaCour.
For me, it's hard. I don't reread. So for a book to have a very strong impact on me, I hold it still, even though I only read it once, mostly out of anxiety for the time that I have on this earth to read books. But I think the Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman is, to me, like as close as a book comes to perfect. Like, I'm a huge fan of Neil's work, but like that of all of them is the one that I feel is immaculate. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Of course. All right, last two.
Good evening, how are ya?
Hi.
So these have all been quite difficult questions, and I'm hoping this one's gonna be a little easier.
Yes.
So you've talked about poetry, you write and you speak so eloquently and beautifully. Is there any chance we're getting some poetry from you one day?
Poetry.
Oh.
No, because I have taken to feeding poetry into my prose.
Okay.
I think that the place where I feel happiest. Now, there are like little cheats on that. Our Dark Duet, which is in the Monsters of Verity series, has an entire monster that thinks in free verse. Ooh. So there have been times in my work where I have had a dalliance. My next standalone novel, which I'm only calling Toxic Lesbian Vampires because I can't reveal the title, opens with a poem. And I would tell you the poem, because it's only like 4 lines long, but it would reveal the title. So, but I will say, I love having dalliances with sound and rhythm, but I am at my happiest when I figure out how to do that within the context of my prose.
Wonderful, thank you.
You're welcome. Last but not least, hi.
Hi. I also have a poetry question.
Yeah?
Hilariously. I love to write, and I once thought I was too good for poetry, and then was taught otherwise.
Yes.
And I was going to ask how poetry influenced your writing, but you kind of answered that a bit. You can also go more into it. Did you ever think you were too good for poetry versus writing? Not like writing poetry, but
like reading it or like
reading it? Yeah, more reading, like consuming poetry.
No.
And do you have a recommendation?
Yeah, so here's what you have to understand about me is I was raised on a steady diet of poetry. My mom is English, and she would sit on the edge of the bed and she would read me Shel Silverstein and William Blake and Robert Frost and Baudelaire to the point where when I was 9 or 10, I could think in rhyme and meter. It is the most naturalistic thing in the world. To me, it infuses the way I speak. It infuses the way I write. The reason that I shifted from poetry to prose was because it comes back to Neil Gaiman, right? I didn't want to pick a lane. I didn't want to have to choose. And for so long, you're taught, especially as a young writer, that you need to choose what kind of writer you will be. And then when I was 16, I found Neil Gaiman's work. And this is somebody who writes everything. Writes poems and screenplays and short fiction and novels and everything in between, and yet you can always tell it's him within a sentence. And I wanted that. My ambition was too grand to stay in poetry, but I also found that one of the very first things that set my voice apart as a writer was that I took that poetic cadence and I twisted it into prose in a way that helped me stand out when I was 19. and the book was absolute trash that I wrote, but it was pretty. And the agents I was pitching it to were like, I don't get it. This book is not working, but your sentence level is doing something that will make you stand out. So I have held on to poetry, and I owe poetry a lot, and I like reading it. I have to be in the right place, but you should read Kate Bayer. And Kate Bayer has an amazing poetry collection that is entirely blackout poetry using emails that have been sent to Kate Bayer. And it is one of the most powerful, the thing about poetry is the thing about all fiction, and we don't say this enough. It's not all the same. The thing about poetry is that you have to find what you like. The same way you have to find what you like in the thickets of fiction and nonfiction. And I think so often we read a poem in a kind of way, and we think, I don't like that. And it's like, but take some time. Libby is a really great resource for this, because poetry collections can be expensive because they're often hardback. Use Libby, use your library apps to test poetry for yourself, to see if you can find something that you love in it. Because when it hits so hard. Like it does. You're just like, whoo, you needed 4 lines to break me. 4 lines. It takes me a whole damn book, and it takes a poet 10 words to just be just right there.
You're right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And thank you all. Thank you, Mark. Can we just Mark, you are extraordinary. Mark Oshiro, I adore you. You're amazing.
And I also, and I hope you all felt this way too. I just love hearing you speak and love watching you do your thing and love getting to see you share yourself and your work with everyone. Thank you to the Georgia Center for the book. Thank you to Charis Circle. Love you guys. Pointing at you, ER.
Yeah.
And all of you for your lovely questions and your kindness.
Thank you for coming. I think this is probably, it's probably the gayest that this church has been in a while, and I really love that. Thank you to this church for holding that space for us and making us feel safe and welcome, because that itself is an incredible gift. So thank you, and thank you all for coming and making this night so, so special. Thank you.
Once again, ladies and gentlemen, Mark, Victoria, if you have written the little card, don't forget to drop it at Charis's table on your way out. They do have some signed copies of Addie LaRue out there. You can also pick up Mark's book. I encourage you to do so. Once again, a big round for Mark and Victoria. Thank you all so much for coming, and we'll see you again very, very soon.